Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 8th version of our Brexit webinar series. As frequent viewers know, my name is Anna Jansen. I'm Head of European Engagement at Universities UK International. And for those who've been paying attention, this time we're doing the webinar a little bit differently than normally. Normally I host these webinars with the UK Government Science and Innovation Network, but as you can imagine, with the negotiations being where they are at the moment, there isn't really much that they can talk about live to other audiences, so they've opted out for this webinar, but they will be back for the future. But joining me today is Christina, who is the Director of the UK Research Office in Brussels, and she has very kindly agreed to join us for the Q&A at the end of the webinar, so she will be back, and she will be back for all of your research questions. Another thing I want to point out from the get-go that unfortunately, due to the negotiations and all of other things, there is a limit to what I can say today. It's not that I don't want to give you all the information, but we're waiting on things that will wrap up in the negotiations. And of course, we're also waiting to some things where the UK government needs to make an announcement. So we don't have all the information yet. So you might ask, why do this webinar at all if you don't have all the information? Well, that is really because I personally felt it would be unwise to wait any longer. Because we are at a phase where you kind of need to start thinking about how to prepare for the end of the transition period if there were to be a no deal. And there are only about 8 weeks left, and we might have a scenario that in a couple of weeks a deal is made and we know a lot more, and then all of this work will be unnecessary. But I'd rather have that than wait a couple of more weeks hoping we might get announcements or we might know where the negotiations are going to end up and then come to you. Well, if that is not happening, then with a couple of weeks to go before the end of the year, I really think that will be not enough time for universities to prepare for the end of the transition period in case we have a no deal scenario or a not a negotiated outcome scenario. So that is why I really thought I needed to go ahead with this webinar series anyway. What I'm going to do is give you an overview of what we know right now on the different areas, just like always. And we have 3 more dedicated webinars next week, one on immigration, one on research, and one on mobility. So if that's of interest for you in your work, I would very much encourage you to sign up to those as well. And as always, the slides will be shared in a couple of days after the webinar, and also a recording. We'll post it on our YouTube channel, and that link will be sent to everyone who registered for the webinar as well. Moving on to my, yes, there we go. Sorry. Still working out this laptop and all the online systems, because we always used to do this from our office, and now we're doing it from home, of course, which has its own dimension of things that you need to sort out. Right, anyways, what you're seeing now on your slides, you all know. There's nothing new here. We've left on the 31st of January 2020. We are now in the last bit of the transition period, and on the 1st of January, we should have a new relationship with the between the UK and the EU. The negotiations started this year around March, and there was some delay because of the pandemic, which is not surprising, but it's very much back at the top of the political agenda at the moment. Then in June, there was a meeting of the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee, and it was there that the UK firmly confirmed that the UK government won't extend the transition period. So that really means that all the ducks need to be in a row by the end of this calendar year. The negotiations have gone on throughout the summer, but progress has been slower than we had hoped. And there was a special European Council summit 2 weeks ago, and we actually hoped that after that council announcement would be made, saying that sufficient progress was being made to go into what they call the tunnel in Brussels, which is basically just when the negotiators say, okay, there's been enough progress, we can now focus on getting to the nitty-gritty and hammering out this deal without any disturbance from outside, so without any press releases or anything like that, any briefings. But that didn't happen, unfortunately, and what you saw was a bit of a going back and forth on, who was to blame that we didn't have enough progress. But luckily then on Thursday last week, there was an announcement saying that the negotiators found that there was enough grounds to continue the negotiations, and we've heard that the talks have intensified, and they are going on as we speak, and that maybe some sources have said that a deal could be possible within a few weeks. So fingers crossed. Then a slide which is very familiar probably to those of you who've joined our webinars previously, just to reiterate and reassure you that our priorities haven't changed, and this is still very much what we are communicating to both government and stakeholders in Brussels and our partners across Europe. We want full association to Erasmus+, full association to Horizon Europe, minimal disruption in terms of immigration for students and staff, and of course solutions and ongoing cooperation in the field of data protection, qualification recognition, and provision of education services. So what I wanted to do here really was kind of tell you what the two processes are that are working together next side by side really, that influence the possible scenarios that we could face on the 1st of January. So on the one hand, you've got the EU-UK negotiations on the future relationship, and there is, I would say, a real risk that this is not negotiated, solved by the end of the year or at all. And in addition to that, you've got the negotiations around wrapping up the EU program, so Erasmus+ starting next year and Horizon Europe starting next year. And both of these programs still need to be wrapped up in terms of content and budget. And these are two things that are operating next to each other and influencing the timelines and influencing when and if the UK can associate to these programs. So those two things together result in three possible scenarios from the 1st of January onwards. The first one being EU-UK future relationship negotiations and the final program negotiations on Erasmus and Horizon Europe. They are finalized on time, and that would translate into UK association to these programs on the 1st of January 2021. Then the second scenario is the EU-UK future relationship negotiations or the final program negotiations are delayed, but association still looks likely. So then you have a scenario where the association to these programs is still on the table, and that the UK government would have to ensure that you have stopgap systems in place that bridge the gap from the 1st of January until association. And then the third scenario is where either the EU-UK future relationship negotiations fail or the final program association negotiations fail. And then that results into the UK not associating to the EU programs, and that means that the UK government need to have the domestic alternatives up and running by the end of this year. There are a couple of things I want to say as well. I think it's really important to stress that we find ourselves in a different possible no-deal scenario that we did a year ago. A year ago, in March and October, if we had left without a deal then, we would have left in a sort of a cliff edge scenario where we would have been kicked out of programs while we were part of these programs, so Erasmus and Horizon 2020. That is not the case at the moment. Our participation in the current programs is covered by the Withdrawal Agreement. That won't be affected, and any projects funded, mobilities funded under these current programs will continue, and they are fine. We wouldn't have been, if we don't have association by the end of the year or a little bit later, we won't be part of new programs, but then the UK government will have domestic alternatives in place. So it's less of a cliff edge scenario in this case. Another thing I think which is important to mention is that having a free trade agreement doesn't automatically translate into the UK associating to Erasmus+ or Horizon Europe. Because the way you should see it is as the free trade agreement would give you the framework for continuing talks on specific program association negotiations. So we need the FTA for the framework, but then you have individual negotiations per program going on. So this is where the finalization of these future programs in terms of budget and content, what I said earlier, come into play, and these are important for the timeline on when the UK could associate. So the next thing I wanted to do really was to run you through another couple of scenarios, but this time in terms of EU students coming to the UK and when they're coming and for which degree, so full degree courses, and what that means in terms of immigration status and student fees. So the first scenario is where EU students start a full degree course in 2020-2021, so this academic year and beyond, and they arrive in the UK before or on the 31st of December 2020. So these students are eligible for home fee status in all nations and tuition fee loan in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And they are eligible to apply for the EU settlement scheme, and that allows you to stay in the UK after studying, provided that you've applied by the 30th of June 2021. Then the second scenario is an EU students starting full degree course in 2020-2021, so this academic year, but you're arriving in the UK after the 31st of December 2020. So that means these students are eligible for home fee status and tuition fee loan, but they will need to apply for a student visa through the student route, and they will be eligible to apply for the graduate route when they graduate. And then the third scenario is starting a full degree course in 2021-2022, so next academic year, and arriving in the UK after the 31st of December 2020. So then students who are not covered by the withdrawal agreement, they are not eligible for home fee status or loan, so that means they have to pay international fees. These students also have to apply for a student visa through the student route, and they will be eligible to apply for the graduate route. So just to clarify a little bit more, I will come back to the student route and the graduate route and explain them a little bit more in detail. A lot more detail you get at the immigration webinar next week. So if you're interested in that, again, I recommend you to register for that webinar. But just to zoom in a little bit on the arrival dates. So students arriving in the UK on or before the 31st of December 2020, they don't need a visa. They can apply for the EU settlement scheme. And if they have pre-settled or settled status, they can just then stay in the UK. If you've got pre-settled status, that means that you can build up to 5 years and then apply for settled status, and settled status gives you the opportunity to stay in the UK as long as you like. I think it's really important to clarify as well that pre-settled status and settled status won't influence your rights to home fee status. Both if you've got pre-settled status and if you've got settled status, that means that you're entitled to home fee status. Then a little bit on the international fees. International fees really depend on the university and the degree that you're doing. So although that is maybe not incredibly helpful because you don't have just one go-to web page where you have all the information, we really do advise EU students to go to the specific, contact the specific university they're interested in with the course they're interested in, and ask them, you know, what is the international fee? What are the consequences for me? We know that some universities have already announced what they're going to do. Other universities are in the process of announcing this. So the best thing to do is really to contact the individual universities. Then the exception of all of this is for Irish citizens. They can apply to the EU settlement scheme, but the government has announced that they don't have to because their rights and their residence is guaranteed under the common travel area arrangements. So the change in fee status won't apply to Irish citizens, and also the right to study and access to any benefits and services is also again protected under the CTA agreements. Then, as I promised, a little bit about the student route and the graduate route. On the student route side, applicants will be able to apply, have been able to apply since the 5th of October, and in the future you'll be able to apply 6 months in advance. Applicants it applies to all international students, so that is EU and non-EU, and application will cost around £348, and then individuals also have to pay the immigration health surcharge, which is £470. The student route is a points-based route, but they are based on the old Tier 4 arrangements for people who are familiar with the immigration tiers. And that means that not a lot's changed. The requirements for students to go through that student route is that you have a confirmation of acceptance of study. There is an English language requirement and proof that students can fund themselves, so pay for the fees and living costs. Then the graduate route, it's due to launch in the summer of 2021, and it will allow those who have completed the degree in the UK to stay in the UK for 2 years and 3 years in case of PhD graduates, to work at any skill level and to switch to a skilled work route if they found a suitable job. Details are still being hammered out by the government, but the thinking is that students would have to complete their entire degree in the UK. Then a couple of things on short-term study arrangements and the immigration rules at the moment. So if you're coming to the UK to study for 6 months or less, then these students can apply under the visitor route, provided that it is at an accredited institution, and this arrangement will replace the short-term study visa. And this actually means that you don't require a visa and you can enter the UK with an e-passport. Then on work placements, at the moment, there is some uncertainty about how the new immigration system will enable students who want to come to the UK for work placement between 2 and 11 months. We are working with the government on this, and they are very much aware of it. One of the things that we are suggesting is to create a dedicated immigration route which would cover both short-term study and work placements. It's not likely that this will be in place by the 1st of January, so we're working with the government on trying to create a solution that would work in the in-between period until we would hopefully then have a dedicated immigration route. There's nothing confirmed, there's nothing as of yet that is policy, but things we are looking into is, for example, having the new Erasmus Plus program or the new domestic replacement scheme, whichever we'll need, to be put on the list of government authorized exchange schemes, and that would mean that students can apply through the Tier 5 temporary work route in case of work placements. Then if you want to come to the UK and study and your placement is between 6 to 12 months, so this is study arrangements, again, at the moment, it's not, this is something that we would want to be included in a dedicated immigration route, because at the moment, these students will have to apply through the student route. And we are, again, currently discussing with the government how you could solve that in the long term, but also in the short term to see if there are any concessions that it can be done, because the student route would be an expensive option for if you're here for, say, 9 months and you would have to pay all those charges. So we're talking to government and seeing if we can make an exception and how you could make that work for short-term study arrangements that are longer than 6 months but shorter than 12 months. Then just a little slide to let you know that we've drafted a document which is online on our website. I've got a slide with all the links of all of our resources at the end of the presentation, so you'll get that. The link to this guide is there as well, but it just covers what we know on these specific issues and what we're recommending universities to do and what we're asking government for, which we still need to have some clarification on. As you can see, we'll probably address almost all of them today, but just so you know, this is something that we have as a resource for you on our website, and the link is in the presentation, so you'll get that when the slides are shared. So diving into guidance and recommendations and things to think about to prepare for a no-deal end of the transition period. What I'll do for Erasmus and Horizon Europe is just basically first talk about where we're at right now, how the negotiations are going, and then some advice on things you could think about for the current program to do to prepare for the end of the transition period. So as I already said, it is our priority to associate to Erasmus Plus, and we've lobbied for that at the UK government, we've lobbied for that in Brussels, we've told our European stakeholders far and wide that this is something that is really important to us. One of the more public-facing things we've done is in the past summer, together with the Association of Colleges, co-signed a joint statement with the European Students' Union and US-UK and the Erasmus Student Network. And it was really to ask the negotiations to come to a compromise that would work for everyone, and also to highlight the opportunities that would be lost for students if the UK is not a part of the next Erasmus program. I'd say overall, the negotiations, when it comes to the EU programs, it's some of the least contentious areas, as you can imagine. It's nothing like fisheries. Some progress has been made, and we know the negotiations are going on in good faith, but we do fear that the positions on both sides is quite divergent, and that there is a real risk that the UK will not associate to this program that's starting next year. On the EU side, they're saying it's the whole program for 7 years. And on the UK side, the government is saying we're more interested in parts of the program and for maybe time-limited periods. You can translate that into that the UK government is mainly interested in the mobility parts of the program and not so much the other parts, which are key action 2 and 3. So if indeed we then aren't going to get, if that's what's going to happen, we don't get the next Erasmus Programme Association negotiated, then what are the things you need to know? Well, I've said it before, but I'm going to repeat it again. We remain fully eligible for the current programme, even if contracts run past the end of the transition period. This means that UK-based students and staff will be able to participate in exchanges with funding that is part of the current Erasmus programme, and it also means that staff and students from European partner universities can come to the UK with funding from the current programme, even if that is, beyond the 1st of January 2021. This doesn't change if we don't have a free trade agreement, because this is all protected under the Withdrawal Agreement, and it also doesn't change due to the UK's internal market bill. We've had some questions about this, but the Commission has confirmed that the bill will not influence the UK's participation in current EU programmes. So then, if an agreement were to be reached, then UK-based students and staff can participate in the next programme. If we don't have an agreement, then the UK government has committed to replace the mobility aspects of Erasmus with a domestic scheme, and thereby replace Erasmus Plus participation. The UK government hasn't committed to replacing the non-mobility aspects of the Erasmus Plus programme, so that will be the key action 2 and 3. And they also still have to confirm what this domestic alternative would look like. And of course, much will depend on the level of funding that will be available or made available for this scheme. However, what I can share in terms of ambitions, again, none of this is official, none of this is, no decisions have been made, is that it will be a UK-wide scheme, a global scheme, student and staff mobility. There will be organizational support, special needs support, and it would include all levels, also PG and PhD mobility. We know there is a discussion going on whether or not there is the possibility to fund some inbound mobility, but again, that really, all of this depends on how much money there will be available, and I think there's a really big chance that inbound mobility won't be financed. If it were, I think it would only be a very small part, a very small section of the program. So a little bit of what we tried to pull together in terms of guidance for things for you to think about when you're looking at your own work program and the activities you have within your university. So again, I've said it before, I'm going to repeat it throughout the webinar. If we don't have a free trade agreement, it doesn't affect the current arrangements, so that all stands. But you need to think about how you want to manage your funding and how you want to prioritize your funding for the current Erasmus Plus program. So, for example, if you've got a 24-month grant agreement, in the 2020 call, you can extend that to 36 months. But this is something you do have to make sure to get signed off by the national agency by the end of the year, and decide then. Really, it's a policy decision about whether or not, and if yes, how you want to stretch your money. What you could do, for example, under Key Action 103 is you could either choose to give smaller funds to everyone so that more people get some funding, but it would be a reduced level of funding, or if you don't think that is fair, make a policy decision about what the criteria are for prioritization of your funding. You could, for example, take into consideration the WP background of students and whether or not a period abroad is compulsory for the degree that students are doing. Of course, these funding decisions will impact students, so we advise you to be very open and transparent to your students about the decisions you're making and why you're making them. Two things to I think are good to highlight is that the interinstitutional agreements for Key Action 1 have been extended by the Commission to 2022 and will be applicable during that time. And the Erasmus Charter will continue to apply to projects that are funded under the current programme. Then a couple of things that I pulled together to think about for European universities, so universities not based in the UK. So the Commission announced, what I already alluded to, the Commission announced that because of COVID, universities can extend their grant agreements from 24 months to 36 months. You could check with your national agency if you can do that as well. And then what you can do is use that funding, because you can stretch it longer. You can use your current Erasmus Plus funding to send staff and students to the UK, because current funding is fine and is protected in case we don't have Erasmus from 2021 onwards. There's also an opportunity in the new Erasmus program. What is at the moment Key Action 103 will have an international envelope. It's a small part of the budget, but that envelope we hear should allow universities in Europe to send their students to the UK. So that's also something you could do, but it's of course a strategic decision for each university to make whether or not that is something that you want to do and is in line with what your priorities are for student mobility and of course the demands of students where they want to go. And I think it's a good reminder that for the European partners that UK universities need to know between January and April, and I'm sure this is the same for partners across Europe, if their partner universities are going to be willing to continue with them if we don't have Erasmus next year, because that is the period in which UK universities go through the selection procedure of students going abroad. Then a little bit of extra guidance, again linked to mobility and linked to when students are leaving. So UK students leaving before the 31st of December 2020 are covered by the Withdrawal Agreement. I would advise them to apply for the student EHIC because that is valid for the entire placement. And then of course advise them to contact the student support at the hosting university. UK students leaving after the 31st of December, check the immigration rules and requirements in the destination member state. Make sure they have sufficient health insurance and contact student support at the hosting university. For staff working in mobility offices, I would say think about making a comms package for both inbound students and outbound students with all the things they need to do and know in terms of mobility and in terms of enough insurance, for example, what I just highlighted. So then on the research side, again, I'll just walk through what our priorities are in the negotiations and then go into the advice. Unsurprisingly, as I said, full association is our priority. And again, also on this side, this is something that we've been very clearly communicating with the UK government, stakeholders in Brussels and our stakeholders across Europe. A public-facing, one of the latest public-facing messages we've done on that front was a joint statement that was initiated by the Wellcome Trust, and we worked with them on. A lot of European national rectors conferences signed, over 100 organizations actually signed, and what we said in that joint statement, there's a hyperlink in the slide so you can read it if you like, just how you could secure an agreement and really tackle the challenges of the negotiations on specific Horizon Europe Association. So there's a really wide breadth of institutions and individuals that signed this, ranging from the European University Association, Russell Group, Liru, Guild, but also really prominent individuals like Carlos Moedas, who was the former European Commissioner for Research and Science, and Pascal Lamy, who's the former Director General for the WTO, and even two Nobel Prize winners, which I think is kind of cool. When it comes to negotiations, the main stumbling blocks are the finances and the participation rights. On the finances, it's two parts. On the one hand, the EU is proposing a one-way correction mechanism, which would allow, if the UK takes out more in terms of funding than it's put in, that it would, of course, have to pay in more and rectify that, which I think is totally fair. But then it only has this one-way correction mechanism, in the negotiations, they're not really willing to talk about doing it the other way around as well. What if UK participation really goes down and we pay in a lot more than we take out? Then I think it would be fair to also have that corrected the other way around. So that is something that's going on. And on top of that, the EU wants a participation fee. So it's more of a combination of the two, which I think on the finances part makes it a bit difficult. And then the other one is the participation rights, you know, a discussion around which kind of calls can the UK participate in and which not. So if we don't have Horizon Europe, and I'm just going to briefly touch on this, and if you want to know more, I would advise you to watch the research webinar that we have next week, is the government, these are again ambitions and ideas, nothing's been confirmed, nothing is been announced, but the options are funding for a third country participation so that the UK research base can participate in the collaborative bids of Horizon Europe, and a UK discovery fund, which would basically be the replacement for the ERC and the Marie Curie actions. And in addition to that, more funding for the prestigious domestic schemes to really attract and retain talent. Then in terms of guidance, it's a little bit more simple, I would say, on the Horizon side than it is on the mobility side. Again, all applications that and funding awarded through the Horizon 2020 program are fine and they are safe, and the Commission will continue to process them until they finish. And the kind of advice we want to give you here is that A, make sure that your researchers understand that their current projects can go ahead as planned and nothing's going to change there, and that really also they reach out to their European partners and emphasize this. And on the other hand, it would be some advice around trying to familiarize yourself with the new program, because both in a scenario if we don't associate or if we do, you'd be a step in front of everyone else if you just make sure that you know the program and you know what the steps will be if we have third country participation or if we have full association. UPRA will be working with the community to help them understand how this works, either third country participation or any domestic alternatives. And Christina will maybe say a few words on that at the start of the Q&A. So then a few other bits and bobs, transnational education guidance. So universities in the UK operate a wide range of collaborative models for transnational education. So this goes from distance learning, franchising, validation, dual and joint approaches, degrees, and how a no-deal end of the transition period will affect the provision of transnational education really depends on the nature of the negotiated agreement, or if there isn't any, the specific T&E arrangement that the partners have going on, and the territory where the T&E is delivered. So suggested actions we have in this field for universities are first to check the requirements for cross-border provision of higher education for third countries in any EU jurisdiction you're operating. Check the provision for graduates to have their qualifications professionally recognized in the EU territory where you're operating. Checking the provisions that would affect quality assurance of your T&E program delivered in territory where you are delivering it. Assess the impact of any modifications to your program, and assess the impact of any administrative barriers, including, for example, tax status changes. So you've got on the right-hand side in the slide, you've got a little link to a survey or a form that we have online, where we basically ask people who are working in T&E to say if there are any trade barriers that they can see that will happen from the 1st of January onwards. With this form, we're hoping to get a better picture around what possible trade barriers that could be happening in the new year. And I think actually T&E partners in the EU are probably best placed to fill this form in and to have a good understanding of this. So any European viewers who either are working on transnational education with UK partners or know colleagues who are working on transnational education with UK partners, I would encourage you to look at the form, and I would encourage you to think about in terms of what kind of trade barriers could possibly be occurring as soon as the UK has left the EU. Or we already have left, sorry, but we don't have a future trade agreement. So professional qualification recognition. I start these things always by highlighting the difference between the academic qualifications and the professional qualifications. You've heard me do it before, but just to say again that the recognition of academic qualifications is part of the Bologna process and the European higher education area, and the UK remains a part of that. Nothing's going to change there. So you don't have to worry about that. It's the mutual recognition of professional qualifications, which is an EU directive, which is a different story. This will, cease to apply at the end of the transition period, and it's just what makes sure that you have a simplified process for a number of professional qualifications. And the ones that are affected are doctors, nurses, dental practitioners, pharmacists, veterinary surgeons, lawyers, and architects or engineers. So just to clarify and caveat that there won't be any changes in the recognition of qualification in the UK and Ireland. Again, this is covered by the Common Travel Area Arrangement. But when it comes to MRPQ, there are diverging stances on how to continue in the future between the EU and the UK. What the UK wants is to have a process that will make it easier for people to get their qualifications recognised, whereas the EU more wants a framework in place so that countries can do that bilaterally. So either way, it looks very likely that there will be some extra steps people need to take in order to get their degrees, their professional qualifications recognised. It won't be as easy as it used to be. So suggested actions for universities on this front is, in order not to breach CMA guidelines, you have to make sure that you're not advertising your course in a way that it will be eligible for automatic mutual recognition of qualifications when this directive applies. Ensure that EEA students studying a regulated or sectoral profession know that there are changes in these rules and regulations, and do the same for UK students who are studying in regulated or sectoral professions. Then data protection, and I promise we're almost there. On data protection, the General Data Protection Regulation will cease to apply to the UK after the end of the transition period. And what you'd actually need is an adequacy decision from the EU. And what an adequacy decision is that where it's the process by which the EU determines whether or not a third country has adequate levels of protection of personal data. What we hear is that there is a delay in this, or there is a chance that this would not be in place by the end of the year. So in case that is happening, then the things that we would advise universities to do is review your data transfers, what is going to whom, from whom, and how much and how often, and review any contracts that have reference to data transfer. A mitigation could be to insert a clause in your contracts that would deal with the adequacy issue. The link in the slide is to a website that gives you more information on how to do that. And of course, to consider all data flows in areas such as cloud services, HR and payroll services, but also research data and databases. As I promised, this is the slide with all the links. So you've got the end of transition period guidance, you've got FAQs for students, and the links to the webinars, and 3 on the right are the ones that we're doing next week. So again, if you're interested, definitely sign up. And then just a slide to say, I know we're all very much working on COVID-19 and the pandemic, and it continues to take up so much of everyone's time, and it's a very important and pressing issue. The end of the transition period is becoming an important and pressing issue as well. It's only 8 weeks until Christmas holidays. If we don't have a deal, you at least want to have reviewed the processes within your universities and the things you might need to think about in order to prepare for the end of the transition period. As soon as we have more information, we'll be coming back to you with more information about either domestic alternatives, if that is what is required, or what this new free trade agreement would look like and what you need to know and do about that. I think that would be a shorter discussion than if we go into the domestic alternatives. But just to say that as soon as we know, we'll come back to you and give you all of that information. So just a big thank you for listening to me for such a long time. Much too long, but I'd now like to invite Christina back for the Q&A, and just to ask Christina if there's anything that you just want to briefly mention before we dive into the questions.
Thank you, Anna-Mai. I really enjoyed that. So as always, we're familiar with all of the topics, but it was really good to listen to your presentation. And as always, it's a real pleasure to work with you and colleagues at Universities UK. And I think it's fair to say on behalf of the whole community, we all really appreciate all the great work that you do. So thank you. And maybe just to pick up on one of the points that you mentioned and continue to reiterate during the presentation, and I would really like to reiterate this as well, which is the importance of the fact that there's a huge amount of opportunity still available under Horizon 2020. We continue to, under the withdrawal agreement during the transition period, be fully eligible to apply for calls. And one of those calls that's open at the moment is the Green Deal call. This is a flagship initiative. And in the final year, which we are in, of Horizon 2020, there's a €1 billion call that's open at the moment. It closes on the 26th of January. And just in case anyone had any confusion over this, the UK is fully eligible to participate. So if you're joining us from another country and you'd like to work with UK partners on this call, please do include them with full confidence. Similarly, if you have any questions about applying for the call, reach out to us. We can also connect you with our colleagues in the UK National Contact Point Network who, like us, have a range of resources to help and support you. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Christina. Yeah, let's dive in. We have 20 minutes, which is maybe a bit long. I'm quite flexible in terms of if the questions run out at some point, we just stop. We don't need to feel like we need to make the whole hour work. But let me just have a look. Yeah, first question. What is the reciprocal intention of domestic alternative only including outbound? Will incoming staff and students be able to use Erasmus grants to come to the UK, or will they have to decide at national institutional level? So indeed, so if the UK domestic alternative only funds outbound mobility, then you have a little bit of leeway in the first couple of years if you, what I explained, can stretch your funding of the current program, and then you could use that funding to send students to the UK with the current funding of the current program, because that is also covered. But if you don't have that, or at some point that will run out, and you just are focused, you're just left with a UK domestic alternative scheme that only funds outbound, then indeed it will be something that will have to be decided on institutional or national level. And that we have addressed with the UK government the issues around funding only outbound mobility, and that would be problematic for our European partners. I think that is one of the reasons why they are talking about it and taking it into consideration. I think we all can appreciate with the current pandemic and the economic situation that the finances will be key in this, and the decision on the finances will be key in this, and there's nothing I can say on that yet, other than that they are taking it into advisement. Another question, could you advise which guidance you have regarding EHICs? We are not clear that they are valid for EU nationals already in the UK beyond the 31st of December 2020. So you've got two possible scenarios that pop into my head here immediately, is because I'm wondering, is this about EU citizens who've lived here for years and years, or is this students coming to the UK for a short period? If they've come before but in either case, if they've come before the 31st of December, your rights are guaranteed, so that EHIC will remain valid, as I've been told, the same way if UK students go abroad before the 31st, that EHIC will be valid for their placement. So that should be the same the other way around. Go down for the next one. Yeah, already answered that one. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So one more question around, just to confirm if what Christina actually already addressed in her final remarks, but it was popped in here during the presentation, if indeed current current projects on Horizon 2020 are safe and covered for the duration of the programs.
Thank you. That's an easy one. It's it's a frequent question. It's a well-rehearsed answer, but you can, with confidence, know that your project, if you're working on an ongoing project, will be funded for its lifetime. So Horizon Europe projects with UK participants on them, the UK participant will be funded for the lifetime of the project, and that's under the Withdrawal Agreement.
Just to remind everyone, by the way, that any questions, because our behind the scenes tech experts are trying to collate all your questions and send them on and go through them. Any questions that we're not answering right now or we've missed or whatever, we will take offline and we'll get back to you. So don't worry about that. We will answer those questions. We'll just come back to you on email afterwards. Go ahead. Sorry, Christina.
There's an important point about questions. So any of the questions that come in today, we will be using these both to help inform the guidance material. But as Anna and I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, it's also an important part of being able to feed into the wider policy discussions. So if you do have burning questions and you haven't yet asked them, even though we're running towards the end of the session, please do keep sending those in.
Yeah, brilliant. I don't see any other questions coming in. I'm going to give it a few more seconds to see if anything else pops up. Oh, and of course it does as soon as I say that. Is there any more detail or information available on the recognition of professional programs or somewhere to flag to be able to keep track on this? Basically what I've explained during the webinar, that's it, that's all we've got. Feel free to, again, we've got your, because you're registered, we've got your email address, and I'm happy to get back to you offline and to just signpost a couple of things for you. But what I just explained is pretty much the gist of it. And it will just be a reality, I think, that it will, for these professions, things will change, and we just don't know how much they will change, and how much more students would have to do to get their degrees or professional qualifications recognized. Okay, another question: is the fee position the same for PhD students as those for full degree? So do you mean the international fees or the fees for home fee status? That isn't. Let me get back to that one, because that's a difference, of course. I'll email you, the person who sent in that question, I'll email you afterwards. Can you please go through the previous slide with the links? Yes, of course. Let me just do that for you. This one, so that everyone just can see it, what we're doing. And I also, so I don't want to take this opportunity away from my lovely UKI colleagues to just show you, and again, you'll get these links, this all you'll get, that we're doing a whole host of other events as well. So let me see if there are any other questions. Otherwise, yeah, apparently not, or at least maybe too specific to deal with right here. So what I'm going to do, we're going to wrap it up and just promise everyone because we've got all your questions, we've got your details. So me and my colleagues will come back to you this week or the next on your questions, either to get more clarification about what you mean, and then try and answer them for you, or reach out to the people who have the answers if we don't have them. So we will be coming back to you, don't worry about that. So all that leaves me is to thank my lovely colleagues behind the screen who've helped me us do this webinar. I hope you found it useful. I want to thank Christina so much for joining us for the Q&A session. It's always really valuable because you guys know the nitty-gritty stuff that we don't know. So very much appreciated. And we will, I'd say, very likely hold other webinars in the future as well, as soon as we know more. And thank you all for viewing, very much appreciated, and see you next time.